Okay, just very quickly a bit of background about myself. I've been involved in play, youth and community development work for just under 50 years. And for 40 of those years I've lived and worked in southwest Burnley. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about is the reason why I'm a passionate advocate for young people as thoughtful, thorough and highly effective decision makers, just as people in communities are. Because throughout my career I've been involved in a lot of regeneration programs, things where the rhetoric is about communities being in control and having power and making choices, when the reality is that the power is retained in elites who don't really, in my opinion, often fully understand the real reality of living in those communities over which they control substantial resources. So that's a key part of what we want to talk about. And is it the red button that I push for the next slide? The title, Round Our Way, I'm just going to explain. What is it? It's a much better title than I came up with, because having said what I said about officer elites, I was an officer in another life until I escaped, got time off for bad behaviour perhaps. But the title Round Our Way came from young people. I came up with adverse childhood experiences defining our community. Now, isn't that boring? And they said, what's that all about? And I have to say there's a theme behind that, because the reason we developed the project in the way that we did is that when we went into our schools and into our community partnership and tried to explain about adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed practice, that language just turned people off. They didn't understand what does it mean in terms of our life, our lived experience. It didn't mean anything. And the other thing that came across was it's negative. It's all about negatives. We don't want to talk about negatives. We want to build a positive future for ourselves, for our friends, our families, and for our community. And that's what led us into this project. So just there's a video here. I think we'll show this now. We've really been excited to work with pupils and staff from Cherryfold and Clough Academy, and also our friends and colleagues from Burnley Youth Theatre. We've been involved in producing some wonderful work, and that's going to help us define our community for the next 3 to 5 years. 3 fantastic words have come out of a community ballot process from words generated by pupils from those 2 schools. And it's going to really help us shape the future of our community over that period of time.
The 3 words that were chosen from the community ballot were non-judgmental, diverse and supportive. All 3 groups came together to share the creative work that they had been doing in response to those words, and shared all the hard work that they've been doing for the project.
I've absolutely loved this project. It's been really inspiring how much the young people genuinely believe in the whole concept of the words, hearing their ideas and how passionately they feel that people should not be discriminated against, that inclusion and celebration of diversity are hugely important things. They really believe this, and they've had so much fun being creative, making art to express these ideas.
Come in and see this community through the eyes of young people. I feel like young people don't often get a chance to be heard in that respect and talk about their place and their people here in Burnley, and that was really inspiring. And then to hear the amazing words they did with Dominic and be able to make pieces of physical theatre to bring those to life and show those aspirations for this amazing place was just a real privilege.
My favourite part of this project was the realisation of how much people are judged, which teachers need to judge people.
My favourite part was doing the portrait with Dominic, because it's really funny and he got a lot of sports things in there. Favourite part is when we're doing activities with different people.
So basically what we did, we generated this list of words, and Laura's going to say something later about the creative and expressive arts approaches that we used to get those words. Young people advocated which ones, and we had the community ballot. 175 votes were received, which we were delighted with. And the 3 words that were voted for were supportive. People wanted to live in a community that was supportive, non-judgmental and diverse. Now, aren't those 3 wonderful words that could describe any sort of perfect community, really? And living in a community, southwest Burnley, that regrettably elected the first fascist councillor in our country, for our community to choose diverse as one of those 3 words was outstanding. And I can honestly say I had tears pouring down my face when those results came in, because that demonstrated that the people who were engaged in our community, who were active and committed to it, and I include our young people in that, believed passionately in those 3 words, including a diverse community, and we'll come back on to diversity later. So the whole variety of approaches that we used to develop those ideas, and before we went any further, we got a buy-in from all the key decision makers like Lancashire County Council's Public Health, Burnley Borough Council's leader, Calico, our main social housing provider in Burnley, and the clinical commissioning group. So all the major decision makers in our town bought into it and said, we will listen to the voice of these young people and we will respond to it. We will treat it seriously. We will treat it with the respect that it deserves. So that's where the performance took place. And we had very, very positive responses from all of those partners. The other practical thing about it was that we were able, through the Violence Reduction Unit and a contribution from the Public Health team, to allocate £13,000. So this goes back to this thing about making choices. And obviously we've got a new government in place now. And one of the things the colleague was saying earlier was about we've got to be passionate and advocate for change. We've got to develop a movement. I would urge you to all join a movement to say that communities are the experts. They are the ones that should make choices that affect their lives, instead of it just being tiny little drips of resources with the occasional project. Participatory budgeting is a very grand term, which is a term that could be used to describe the process we've gone through. But it is a very, very important one, where communities make choices that affect their lives. And the quality of those choices, I would argue, where it's allowed to happen, is at least as good as, if not more effective than those decisions made by people who live in ivory towers and hold control over those communities. So that's a big part of what this is all about. So the money that we got that was allocated in the budget, there was an initial sum of £13,000. So the young people took choices and said, what do we want to spend that money on? Interestingly, in terms of diversity, supportive, whichever word you want to look at, they chose to invest half of that money in accessible playground equipment in our local neighbourhood park. And the Borough Council matched that, so they put £6,500 in, and there's some pictures that we'll hopefully get to later that demonstrate that equipment being, after it was installed. They chose £5,000 of that to be spent on a diversity festival, and I'll mention a little bit more about that in a moment. And they decided that £1,500 would be spent on producing badges and T-shirts with some of the slogans that are on one of the slides whenever we get to it at some point. And they came up with some wonderful slogans. My favourite is one, Hugs Not Hate. I'm involved in an anti-racist charity called Hope Not Hate, and I'm trying to persuade colleagues in that charity to adopt Hugs Not Hate as a slogan and produce a wonderful T-shirt from that. So these are all the slogans. That was good. Well done, Justin. You've found the one. So there's a whole range of slogans here. I'm not going to read them all out, but some of them are absolutely wonderful. And my favourite, along with Hugs Not Hate, is when life gives you autism, get a cat. Isn't that an interesting wouldn't that look good on a T-shirt? I think that's wonderful. And that's one of the young people from Clough Academy who's got effectively therapy animals at home. And when he's had a really bad day and the world hasn't really worked for him that day, his cats are there for him. So I think that's a lovely sentiment to express. So that's where we got to. We got that sum of money, and we've now developed actions for 3 of those 10 actions that young people generated. So these are all of the actions there. So the Annual Diversity Festival, We actually then were successful. We were charged really with the responsibility from the young people to go out and try and get additional resources to enable their vision to be delivered upon. And we got just over £14,500 from the Shared Prosperity Fund in Burnley by putting forward the case the young people had made for having a festival that celebrates all aspects of diversity within our community. And there's some slides later on that show young people working on that, and there's going to be a festival in our community running from the end of August to the end of October with a variety of activities taking place in school and community settings. So we had a huge event at the Mechanics where young people chose performers, so there's £6,000 for performers, there's about £4,000 for equipment for things like bouncy castles and that sort of thing, to encourage our families and members of our community to come in and take part in that event where the message of diversity and positivity is going to be shared. So this is part of the activities that we did where young people, for the equipment, they were given a whole range of choices. So people from the council's Parks and Green Spaces team identified lots of different pieces of equipment that could be chosen from within the budget, and each young person was given the same number of votes to vote for whichever pieces of equipment they wanted. And this is the group on the park celebrating the work that they did. So they made a load of really good choices. And then immediately following that event on the park, when we sort of unveiled the new bits of equipment, we went down to Burnley Mechanics, and that range of choices was offered to those young people. So there was a whole range of performers, bits of equipment, and they moved around from table to table and made choices. So the whole of that diversity festival will be shaped by the decisions that young people made.